أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. Today, inshallah, we're carrying on in the subject of what we said was vaginal discharge, which we talked about on Thursday, about how if it's during the menstrual period of a lady, it's more than 3 days, or it's 3 or more days, and it's between 3 and 10 days. We said that how that would be what we call menstruation, and that a woman would need to stop praying and stop fasting. She's not allowed to even fast on those days. And we talked about the rules and regulations concerning that. Today, inshallah, we're talking about the bleeding after giving birth, which is called postnatal lochia. Postnatal lochia, which in Arabic we call it nifas. So from now on, I'll probably refer to it as nifas, is blood that exits following delivery of all or most, but not less than half of the baby. Remember, in fiqh, what did we say? 51% is the same as the whole thing. So if 51% of the baby hasn't come out yet, then we say that you haven't given birth yet, even though the head might have come out. And likewise, if 51% of the baby has come out, we say that you have given birth. Why is this important? In the very unlikely scenario that you have to pray during the birth, so somehow possible that you've had to delay your salah all the way, and then now there's like 20 minutes left for the time to expire, and that is when the birth started happening. So in the very unlikely scenario that you have to pray while giving birth, this matters. So if most of the baby has left, then you don't have to pray because you're in nifas. If 50% of the baby hasn't exited, then we say that you do have to pray because you're not in nifas yet. Obviously, how do you pray? You would just get dry ablution and just with head movements. It'll take literally like a couple seconds. So nifas is the blood that exits following the delivery of all or almost, but not less than half of the baby. Even if the delivery is in pieces, okay, so if something catastrophic has happened and the baby comes out in pieces, limb by limb, any blood before delivery of most of the baby is not postnatal lochia. Like we said, most of the baby needs to come out for you to be considered nifas. And this also concerns the baby, which is what we call miscarriage. The miscarriage baby. If the baby has limbs, right? If you can make out like limbs, facial features, toes, fingers, arms, legs, right? So if the baby is like old enough to have limbs, then we also consider it to be a baby. If it doesn't have limbs yet, then we don't consider it to be a baby. So it would not be postnatal lochia. That bleeding would just be like a nosebleed. You would have to pray. So any blood before most of the baby comes out is what we said, not postnatal lochia. It's not nifas. Therefore, she would have to get wudu if possible. Obviously, during birth, it's not going to be possible. Otherwise, you would do dry ablution and you would pray the prayer with your head gestures. Okay? She should not delay the ritual prayer past this prescribed time. So what is the excuse of a sound, able person? Woe unto those who discards the prayer. So I believe like every madhab has one of its fatwas like this. The Hanafi madhab says basically even if you're giving birth, you have to pray. The Shafi'i madhab, I remember, used to say that even if you're drowning, you have to pray. This, while I'm smiling and talking about it as if it's a joke, it actually shows how serious prayer is. So the Shafi'i madhab says, let's say you've fallen off the boat, you're drowning, and the time is about to expire. Would we count it as a missed prayer if the guy were to die right then and there? It says, if you're about to die and you haven't prayed Asr yet, for example, you would have to immediately pray Asr because you're about to die. Your time's going to expire, right? So we don't count it as an excuse. So even death isn't an excuse if you haven't prayed your Salah on time. So you would have to pray immediately before dying if you know you're about to die. Same goes for a lady during birth. Obviously, this is only if the time is about to expire. And it's going to expire before most of the baby comes out, right? So we always look at the end time. So let's say the dhuhr starts at around, let's say, 12:15, and it ends at about 1:45, just to keep it simple. So we don't look at your state at 12:15. We look at your state at 1:45, because at 1:45, Asr starts. So dhuhr is over. At 1:45, were you in nifas or not? Was it postnatal loqya or not? If it was postnatal loqya, then we don't care about what happened at 12:15. We care about that 1:45, that minute. Were you in haid? Were you in nifas at the exit time? So we don't look at the entrance time. We look at the exit time. Same goes for Asr, same goes for Maghrib and Dhuhr and Fajr and all of that. So we look at the end time. So a lady who's, about to give birth or is giving birth, but for some reason it's taking long, will have to, calculate at that stage. Is most of the baby going to come out before this prayer time ends? If it's not, then she needs to quickly do some head movements with dry ablution. Just any stone that she can find, just hit her hand on that, wipe her face and arms, and just do obviously just the fard with some head movements, so that she doesn't miss that prayer. However, if she calculates that most of the baby is going to be out by the time the dhuhr expires, then I'm going to be in postnatal loqya anyways, and I wouldn't have to pray that salah. So over here it gives a little bit of detail. It's nice to know these things just in case it does ever happen to you. If the baby is delivered head first, the chest is reckoned to be half of the body, and any blood thereafter is postnatal loqya, so you wouldn't have to pray. If the delivery is feet first, what we call a breech birth, the navel is reckoned to be half the baby. The postmarital waiting period, the iddah, ends when she gives birth. Any blood seen before the delivery of a child is deemed to be irregular, so istihada, vaginal bleeding, and the ritual prayer remains obligatory. So, like we said, 51% of the baby has to come out first. There is no minimum period of postnatal loqya, and there's no minimum period. So if your bleeding stops in 10 minutes, then you have to start praying. But obviously, usually that doesn't happen. It can go up to like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes all the way up to 40 days, but that's what we call the maximum. There's no minimum period. So unlike haid does have a minimum period. You need to bleed for at least 3 days. But after giving birth, there is no minimum. It could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour. If the blood stops, then you have to pray. And the maximum period is 40 days. So if you do bleed for 40 days, the next day, so 41st day, you have to start praying and you have to start fasting, according to the rules of a person who is excused. Now, we've said that many times up until now, and if we have enough time today, we're going to get to that subject. If she is a loqyal beginner, so she's given birth for the first time, what is in excess of 40 days is irregular. Okay, so it's your first birth. Remember, what did we say? Take note of everything that happens to you. So including in haid, we said even take note of the hour, and if you can, the minute. Why not? It's not much harder. If you know you bled at 5 p.m., you should also know that you bled at either 5:30, 5:45. So just take a note of that. And also, obviously, when you're giving birth for the first time, keep note of when bleeding. Well, bleeding's going to start immediately, but when it stops, take a note and keep note of everything, especially postnatal lochia, because that's more confusing than Haid actually, because your bleeding can stop and then it can start again, but because you've got a whole period of 40 days, that can still be considered as you need to not pray. As for the one with a lochial habit, so if this is your second birth, then you would refer to your first birth. Remember what we said? There's a habit. As long as it happens once, that becomes your habit. So you would refer to your first birth. So what does that mean? That means that if your first birth, you bled for 20 days. In fact, let's just read 294. For example, a woman has 30-day lochial habit. So the first birth, you bled for 30 days. But during the current lochia, so her second or her third birth, she continues to see blood until day 41. So if she bleeds past 40 days, what does she do? She considers only the 30 days, only the first 30 days as nifas, lochia, bleeding. Yeah? The 11 days after that, because she bled for 41 days, 11 days after that is considered istihada. Obviously, she doesn't know this until it passes 40 days. So she doesn't know if it's going to stop on the 38th day, 39th day. So she would just have to carry on with whatever she knows at that stage. But until, after 40 days, so 41 days, she would know, okay, something's gone wrong. Now I have to go back to my original habit and calculate that the first 30 days I was not supposed to pray. And then the 11 days after that, I was supposed to pray. So she would have to do qada of those 10 days. You must wait and not perform the ritual prayer until the completion of day 40, right? So until day 40, she doesn't know whether it's going to stop or not. When day 40 is over, then she knows, okay, something's gone wrong. I have to go back to my habit. My habit is 30 days. So the first 30 days, I'm fine. The 10 days after that, I should have prayed. So she would do qada of that. When she takes a bath, she must also refrain from sexual intercourse. She must make up the prayers of days 31 to 40, as she now realizes this period was irregular vaginal bleeding, istihada. In this case, her lochial habit remains 30 days. Her habit doesn't change because we cannot consider the second bleeding as normal bleeding. And because it's not normal bleeding, we can't make it a new habit. The same principle applies for menstruation. Okay, what does that mean? Let's say your habit is 7 days and you bled for 11 days, which is past the 10-day mark. Because it's past the 10-day mark, you would have to refer to your habit. When you refer to your habit, we say that the first 7 days was bleeding. That was your haid. And the 4 days after that, because you bled for 11 days, right? The 4 days after that was istihada, so you would have to do qada of day 7 to 10. On the 11th day, there shouldn't be any qada because you should have known that past day 10, it's irregular bleeding. So you shouldn't have missed any salahs on the 11th day, but you would have missed your salahs until the 10th day because you don't know whether it's going to stop on 10 or not. A menstrual habit is established by one occurrence and changes with one differing occurrence. So we talked about this on Thursday. We said if your habit is established one time with one occurrence and it changes with one occurrence, so your habit could change every month. It doesn't matter. As long as it's what we called, and on Thursday we detailed what is sahih bleeding, what is sahih tuhur, what is sahih cleanliness. So as long as it's sahih bleeding followed by sahih cleanliness, then we would say that this is your new habit. Postnatal lochia of a mother with twins. Okay, so remember what we said? Bleeding between two births is minimum 6 months cleanliness. And we said that on Thursday. So between two births, your cleanliness is 6 months. So what if a woman has twins? We consider this as one birth. is deemed to commence from the birth of the first baby, whilst the postmarital waiting period commences from the birth of the final baby. So the only difference here would be after the first baby, you are considered to be in postnatal lockya, which is nifas. Okay, so you don't have to pray. You don't have to wait for the second baby to be born to stop praying. You stop praying at the first baby. However, if you're in iddah, so what is iddah? I should have mentioned this in the first time. Iddah is if a man divorces his wife, the wife normally has to wait for 3 periods, 3 menstrual cycles, right? Then she is divorced. Why? Because during these 3 menstrual cycles, they could make up and they could carry on with their marriage. Also, the reason we wait 3 menstrual cycles is just in case she might be pregnant. And by waiting for 3 whole menstrual cycles, right, we know that this woman can't be pregnant. She's literally had periods for 3 months. She can't be pregnant. But what if she is pregnant? What does she do? Then she stays married, even though the man may have divorced her verbally. Her iddah, so she's considered like half divorced. Her iddah, what she has to wait is for the birth of the baby. Reason being is, if we were to allow her to get married and we didn't know whether she was pregnant or not, or we knew she was pregnant, but we allowed her to get married, there could be an argument of whether who the child belongs to. So this has nothing to do with the father, this has nothing to do with the mother, this is all to do with the baby. Because the baby deserves to know who their parents are. And because a child deserves to know who their parents are, even in foster care, you're not allowed to tell the child you're their parents in Islam. We consider this a big lie, and we consider this to be something, you're violating the rights of that child. Every child deserves to know who their real parents are. So even in foster care, let's say you took a baby, you breastfed the baby, you would have to do that, right? For that to be considered your child. It would be your milk child, we call it. The reason you would have to, I say, this is my opinion, I say you would have to breastfeed the child is because if you were taking foster care of a boy, after he reaches puberty, you both would be haram. It would be haram for you both to live in the same household. And so that you would have to breastfeed him to make him your milk child for that ruling to be lifted. And let's say you are taking care of a girl, then your husband can't be with her in the same room as her after she reaches the age of puberty. Either you would have to, have a separate house for the husband and the daughter, which is obviously not viable for most people. You would have to somehow separate them, or that needs to be your milk child for her to carry on being in the same household as the father. So because of this, I say that if you're going to take care of a foster child, take care of a baby and breastfeed it so that it becomes a milk child. And that way, the father becomes the milk father and the mother becomes the milk mother, but you cannot lie to that child. So you cannot tell that child that you're their mother and their father. You can, obviously, if you become the milk mother and the milk father, you can say, I'm your milk mother, I'm your milk father. And if she asks what that, or he asks what that means, you'll just say, when you grow up, I'll tell you. So you can do it that way, but you must tell them who their real parents are. Oh, and because of that, this is why we have an iddah. The iddah is for the baby, not for the woman, not for the husband. It's for the child, for that child to know who their father, who their mother is. Otherwise, there could be an argument whether who their father is, and neither father will take care of the child. That's just how men are wired. They don't usually like to take care of children who are not theirs. Therefore, for the sake of the child, we need to establish who the father is so that that child does get taken care of. When a miscarried fetus that manifests human features, remember we said limbs like toes, hands, arms, feet, yeah? Like a hand, foot, finger, or hair is delivered, a postnatal lochia commences. Okay? If it has no human features, it's just a clotted piece of blood, then it is inconsequential, and any blood observed is menstruation if it continues for 3 days. Okay? If it continues for 3 days, it's menstruation. That is, she does not have postnatal lochia, and any blood seen during or after termination of pregnancy takes the ruling of menstruation if it fits into her menstrual habit. Okay? Otherwise, it is irregular vaginal bleeding. So if it fits into her menstrual habit, so if it's during the days of her normal period, then we would consider it to be periods. However, if it doesn't fit into that habit at all, then we would say it's irregular vaginal bleeding, istihada. Again, like I said, if this does happen to you, you come and you ask. You don't just take what you learned here. This is very basic knowledge, what we're learning here. This is not enough to act upon at the moment. These all have, like basically every line we're reading here, okay, basically every line we're reading here has about 5 or 6, 5 or 6, what we call shurut. 5 or 6 ifs. However, if this happens, or if this happens, or if this happens, but because this book is only giving us the basic knowledge, it's only giving us what we're reading here. It's not giving us all the details of it. However, if this happens, or that happens, or this happens, then the ruling changes. It's not getting into all those details. So there's a quick question. If a cousin has been breastfed, are they both siblings by milk? Yes. So anyone who's drank milk from the same mother, whether they're cousins or completely random strangers to each other, they would become milk brothers and milk sisters. So it would be haram for them to get married. They are allowed to be in the same room, just like their brothers and sisters, and the man would be allowed to look at the hair of the girl or the woman. However, with the condition that there is absolutely no sexual arousal. Okay, so if they've been brought up separately, we would say again it's still haram. Why? They still can't get married, but neither can they stay in the same room together. Why? Because they've been brought up separately. Like being milk brothers and sisters doesn't automatically remove the sexual arousal from either of them, right? They've been brought up separately. But if they've been brought up in the same household, just like brothers and sisters, then we would say, obviously, as long as there's no sexual arousal between them, there normally wouldn't be. If they've been brought up in the same household, then we would say that they're milk brothers and sisters, and she can open her hair in front of him just like he's her brother. So milk brothers and sisters, and this goes for normal brothers and sisters too. If for whatever reason one of the brothers or the sisters, and we're talking about real siblings here, if for whatever reason they're sexually aroused by their sibling, it would be haram for them to look at each other or be in the same room as each other. This just goes for all rulings. So this isn't something special to milk brothers and sisters. If for whatever reason, let's say this brother and sister, they've grown up separate from each other, completely separate. Like the boy was with the father, the girl was with the mother. So basically, by the time they're 20, 25, they've never seen each other. There might be some sexual arousal there, possible. Therefore, we'd say, even though they're brothers and sisters, they have to stay away from each other, right? Protect them both. So with Islam, this is completely out of the subject, but in Islam, for example, even with this pen, right? Even with this, if someone, I'm not going to say me, it'll be embarrassing. If someone were to look at this and for some reason got sexually aroused, that would even be haram. It's just a pen, right? So in Islam, you're not allowed to look at anything other than your spouse with lust. So even if it's a pen, even if it's a wall, even if it's an inanimate object, if you look at it and you feel sexual arousal, that's haram, right? Okay, if a woman who has reached menopause remember menopause starts at 53 years and 4 months. So we said 55 lunar years on Thursday. That is 55 years of age, sees pure blood. Okay. So normally she's supposed to be in menopause, right? So she's supposed to not see any blood, but she sees pure blood, right? Black or deep red, okay? It is menstruation. If it is not pure blood, i.e., it's like green, it's yellow, it's dusky, it's a bit like brown, then it is not menstruation unless her habit before menopause was the same. So if before menopause, this was how she would see her periods, they would be slightly green, slightly yellow, or a different color, right? Then if this is what she normally sees and she sees it in menopause, then we would say she's actually menstruating even though her age is 55, whereby this discharge is also menstruation. Okay, so then how are we going to say that a woman in menopause is not menstruating? So in which circumstances would she be not menstruating? That would be that if she used to see proper blood during her younger days, let's say, and then after menopause, she just started seeing like different colors, a bit of green, a bit of yellow, right? We would say because normally her habit is seeing proper deep red, deep red or black blood. The reason we say black is because obviously when blood dries out, it becomes black. So either deep red or black blood. She went from seeing deep red and black to seeing like a yellowish tint or a green tint. We would say that is just because of her menopause, and that's not her menstruation, unless it was her habit beforehand. So if that was what she was seeing anyways before her menopause, then we would say that, okay, after her menopause, it's the same thing. The legally excused person. So this is very important, and we've said this many times now. So now we're actually going to get into what this means and how this person prays. Pay close attention because this will absolutely happen at least once in your life. Okay, this has happened to me many times, but it'll happen especially because in the Hanafi madhab, bleeding breaks wudu. So any injury you have that just doesn't stop bleeding, you're going to have to use this fatwa to pray. Okay, so the legally excused person. The legally excused person is one suffering from either something similar to urinary incontinence, right? So they can't stop they can't stop droplets of pee coming out, basically. Bowel incontinence, or continual gas release, or they can't stop feces from coming out, or they can't stop gas from coming out. Okay, and what we mean by they can't stop is it's constantly happening, right? Every minute, every 2 minutes, every 3 minutes, they get a drop of blood, they get a drop of urine, or they get some gas, or they get something, right? So this is what we mean by incontinence. Irregular vaginal bleeding, okay? So any woman who's past her 10 days or past her 40 days in nifas would be legally excused. They would have to follow this fatwa. Or inflamed or infected eyes from which water flows, okay? Because this would ruin your wudu. Remember we said blood will ruin your wudu, but also pus. So if you've got an infection and it's yellow, so it's anything other than pure water which comes out of your body will break your wudu, okay? And everything that exits with pain when it is merely water, okay? So if it's pure water, we said it won't break your wudu. But if it exits with pain, okay, so if it's coming from a wound, an active wound, then if it exits with pain, then even if it's pure water, it would break your wudu. And blood, vomit, and pus, even if they exit without pain. So that's why we said with the eye, it's important that it's pus, okay? Because if crying, normal tears, right, that's pure water, even though it's a bit salty, we consider it pure water. That comes out without pain because it's coming from your eye. But if it comes out from your hand and it comes from a blister, but the blister pops with pain, So instead of like the blister can sometimes pop by itself and you don't even feel it, you don't even realize it. Okay, because that's without pain, that would be fine. But if it was with pain, we would say it's come from a wound, right? So 301, we can look at that. Even if the substance exits from the ear, breast, or navel, as it nullifies ablution having exited from a wound. Okay? So all of this, and we can basically say anything that breaks your wudu, right? Anything that breaks your wudu, if it keeps happening and it's something you can't control, okay, then you are legally excused. And what does that mean? The excused must encompass all of an obligatory ritually prayer's prescribed time, either literally or by taking its ruling, such that one cannot find sufficient time to perform ablution and the ritual prayer without the onset of minor ritual impurity. This is a condition for the commencement of being legally excused. So how often? Now this is the question. How often must it happen for us to be legally excused? Can it happen every hour? So if my wudu is being broken by incontinence every hour, am I legally excused? The answer is no. It needs to happen more often. What about a half an hour? Answer is no. It needs to happen even more often. Okay, even though half an hour is going to be a problem, every half an hour your wudu is broken, right? It needs to happen even more often. 15 minutes, you're getting there. Okay. Now, what does this mean? If you have enough time to get wudu and pray, okay, then we say you are not legally excused. You must find that time, okay? If you don't even have that much time, so let's say 10 minutes, everyone's a bit different. Women will probably take longer to get wudu and wear their hijab and pray salah, right? Men are faster because we can get wudu and immediately start praying. So everyone knows themselves. How quickly can you get wudu? And we're talking about the fard, right? Because the sunnahs, in this case, you would skip all the sunnahs. You would wash your face, your arms, quarter of your hair, and your feet, and you would immediately start salah. Okay? So, do you have this much time? If the answer is yes, then you are not legally excused. Okay? If the answer is no, then you must. Okay? I'm pretty sure it's going to explain the rest here now. Okay. It must happen for a whole salah time. So, let's get paint here just to explain it properly, because a lot of people get this wrong, or they don't understand. Okay, so let's do it this way. If we say this is your salah time, okay, and let's say for dhuhr this is 12:30 p.m. and the dhuhr ends at 1:45 p.m. Okay, and let's say this is before dhuhr and this is asr. Okay. So if we said that this is before dhuhr and this is asr and this is the dhuhr time. Okay. So, Okay, so obviously the Dhuhr starts here and ends over here. Now, if, let's say your bleeding started from, let's say it's, the Dhuhr is at 12:30 and your bleeding started at, well, let's say 12:40. Let's say it started at 12:45. 12:45. And it carried on all the way to the end of your Salah time. Right? So it carried all the way until Asr and even past Asr. Okay? So during Dhuhr, what would you do? Because the condition hasn't been met. What was the condition? The condition was that a whole Salah time is encompassed by your excuse. Okay? But this isn't the whole Salah time. Salah started at 12:30. Your bleeding or whatever, right, started at 12:45. So you had 15 minutes to pray and you didn't. Okay? So while you're not sinful for this, okay, we're just saying that you had 15 minutes here. Okay? So 12:45, this isn't a whole Salah time. So by the time you get to Asr, you are not legally excused. But there's still the reality that you're bleeding. So how do you pray at this Dhuhr? At this Dhuhr, you would pray at around 10-15 minutes before Asr. You would get your wudu, okay, even though you're bleeding, and even though you're not legally excused yet, because it hasn't been a full Salah time. Over here, okay, let's this is where you would pray, okay? During this time, you can't pray. During this time, you should have prayed. Okay? So you should have prayed here, but you didn't. And then you started bleeding. Then you would have to wait until the blood stops. The blood hasn't stopped. It's carried on. Obviously, you're not going to miss Salah. What are you going to have to do? Even though you're bleeding, you're going to have to, at the last 15 minutes, okay, right before Asr, you would get your wudu. You would pray. Okay? And you're allowed to pray your sunnah and everything. Okay, that's fine. And then when Asr starts, okay, if it continues throughout the whole of Asr, then again, towards the end of Asr, okay, because until Asr ends, it hasn't been a complete Salah time, right? So again, at the end of Asr, you would do the same thing as you did with Dhuhr, because it hasn't been a whole Salah time yet. You would pray here, okay, you would pray here. Asr time, you're not allowed to pray. Okay. You would pray right at the end of Asr, but with Asr, and this is only for Asr, you would pray about 45 minutes before. Why? Because at the end of Asr, you're not allowed to pray actually. So you would pray about 10 minutes before the sun becomes yellow. When the sun becomes yellow, you're not allowed to pray, except obviously if you haven't prayed Asr yet. You would have to pray Asr, but you're sinful for it. Okay? So before the sun becomes yellow, and what do we mean by that? If you're able to look at the sun and the sun doesn't hurt your eyes, we say you're late. Okay? If you can't look at the sun, it started to go yellow, but you still can't look at it without it hurting your eyes, we say that you've still got time, but you got to hurry. Okay? So that is the time where you would pray. So like 10-15 minutes before the haram time, makruh time, we call it. Okay? So that is when you would pray Asr. But then when it comes to Maghrib, you're now legally excused. Why? Because for the whole Asr time, you had this issue. You had this problem. Okay? For a whole Salah time. Because it started after Dhuhr, right? So if you look at Dhuhr, it started here. It wasn't a whole Salah time. So we just ignore Dhuhr. We pretend like this never happened. Okay? And then we go on to Asr again. For a whole Salah time, we wait. Towards the end, okay, obviously we don't pray in the makruh time. We pray about 10-15 minutes before the makruh time. We prayed there. And then once Asr is over, okay, again our wudu is nullified. Our wudu gets nullified at the exit of every single Salah time. Okay, but once Maghrib enters, then we can get our wudu and we can pray immediately. We don't have to wait until the end of the time anymore. Okay, We don't have to wait until the end of the salah time to pray. We can get our wudu, we can pray immediately. Now, what happens when you do that, right? Because you can pray immediately, you've got wudu until the whole of Maghrib. But again, when Maghrib time ends and Isha time begins, then your wudu is nullified. So if you're touching a Quran, you must let go of it before Isha time. Otherwise, your wudu is going to be nullified while you're holding the Quran. Same goes with salah. If you're praying, you need to make sure you finish your prayer before Isha time. And then, once you're legally excused, so at Maghrib, not at Asr, because at Asr you're not legally excused. You have to wait until Asr finishes and then Maghrib starts. Then you're legally excused. Once you're legally excused, you don't need to bleed throughout the whole salah time to stay legally excused. It only has to happen once during the whole salah time. It only has to happen once. So if we were to draw another box here, and we're talking about Maghrib until Isha, okay? Maghrib until Isha. Because of Asr, right, you're legally excused. So, even though you bled a little bit, let's say, you bled a little bit into Maghrib, and then the bleeding stopped here. Okay, bleeding stopped. You are still legally excused to pray here, even though you were bleeding. Okay, because of Asr. You're allowed to pray here, even though you were bleeding. And so even though you were bleeding, you're allowed to pray here. And then, let's say, throughout the rest, you are fine. Okay, you didn't bleed. Okay, we would say, just because you bled one time here, you're allowed to, you're still what we call legally excused. And then this is Isha, okay? As long as you bleed one time anywhere here, okay? As long as you bleed one time, that could be from here to here, okay? It could be just a 1 minute thing. It doesn't matter, you're legally excused. And we say that you are able to pray anywhere here, even during the bleeding, okay? And we would say that bleeding now, right? As long as it's the same bleeding, it's the same wound, or it's the menstrual period, or whatever it is, right? As long as it's the same bleeding, we say that blood isn't even najis anymore for you. Like, even if you were covered in that blood, you would still be able to pray, because now we say you're legally excused. It's too difficult now, right? You've crossed into a stage where basically it's too difficult for you to consider it impure. Even though it is impure, technically speaking, it's too difficult for you to consider it impure. It's too difficult for you to pray or to wait every last 15 minutes of salah. It's too difficult, right? So we say ad-darurat. We say this is too difficult now. This ruling has gotten way too difficult. So for you, you are legally excused. You can get your salat, you can get your wudu even though you're bleeding. You can pray even though you're bleeding. Even though you're bleeding and that blood has gotten on your clothes, we say it's pure. You're fine. You can pray. Okay? So this is what it means to be legally excused. And remember, it has to happen for a whole salah time. Even if it's like 15 minutes, like we said here in this example, right? It was 12:30, the Hud time started, you haven't prayed yet, and then it's 12:45 and you started bleeding. We don't consider this the whole salah time, okay? You have to wait for the whole of Asr, to bleed throughout the whole of Asr to be considered legally excused. But once that's over, then you can pray whenever you want. You just have to remember, at the exit of every salah time, at the exit, not at the entrance, at the exit of every salah time, your wudu is nullified. So you need to go get wudu again. So for example, after Fajr there is no salah, okay? All the way until Dhuhr. After Fajr, the second the sun rises, your wudu is nullified. So if you are reading Quran or touching the Quran, you can read the Quran, but you can't touch the Quran without wudu. So if you were touching the Quran, you would have to go get wudu and then carry on again, just because the sun rose. Yeah. So this is the hardest it would ever get. the best case scenario would be, right, you start bleeding just before dhuhr. If you start bleeding just before dhuhr and it carries on, right, for the whole of dhuhr, it carries on, then at Asr time, you would just immediately get wudu and start praying. Why? Because the whole Salah time, you were bleeding. Yeah? And obviously, with this example, I said bleeding. This could be urination. This could be passing gas. This could be, feces coming out that you just can't control, right? Anything that breaks your, nullifies your wudu, if it happens for a whole Salah time, then you are finally legally excused. And at the exit of every salah, your wudu is nullified, but then you can go and get wudu, and whatever's coming out of you is considered pure. Okay, you can pray with it on you, and it can get on your clothes, it can get on your body, it can get on the place of prayer. Okay, don't go to a masjid and start pouring blood on the masjid, yeah? But pray at home, and it's pure for you, okay? Okay, so let's do the book. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, we switch back to the book now, and we'll read it through the text. The excuse must encompass all of an obligatory ritual prayer's prescribed time, either literally, okay, or by taking its ruling such that one cannot find sufficient time to perform ablution and the ritual prayer without the onset of minor ritual impurity. We already said this, we emphasize this, right? This is a condition for the commencement of being legally excused. So until this happens, you are not legally excused, like that dhuhr time. Until all of it is encompassed, you are not legally excused in the Asr. If it is encompassed, you are legally excused in the Asr. Right? So to remain legally excused, so you're finally legally excused, let's say in Maghrib, like we said, right? It suffices that the cause of the excuse occurs in a part of the ritual prayer's prescribed time, even if it is only once. So now, for you to stay legally excused, it only has to happen once during that whole Salah time, okay? For the disappearance of the excuse, and to no longer be considered legally excused, okay, the absence of the cause of the excuse for the entire prescribed time of the prayer is a condition. So obviously, it's the opposite of this. If it doesn't even happen one time during a whole Salah time, okay, then we say you're not legally excused anymore. You're not even bleeding, right? Such that the excuse does not occur in any part of the prescribed time. The excuse becomes void from the first moment the cause ceased, okay? Such that if it ceased during the performance of ablution or the ritual prayer and it remained absent until the end of the following ritual prayer's prescribed time, the first prayer is repeated. Okay. So what do we say? We say that you are no longer legally excused from the first time it stopped. Okay. So if it stopped at 1 p.m., okay, so the next day at 1 p.m., you stopped bleeding. And then obviously it didn't happen again you stopped bleeding at 12:15, so before dhuhr, right? And then it carried on all the way throughout dhuhr. Towards the end of dhuhr, you realize, okay, I haven't bled throughout the whole of dhuhr. I'm no longer legally excused. Okay. The ruling of the legally excused person is that ablution is performed for the prescribed time of each ritual prayer. Okay. And then one may perform numerous obligatory and non-obligatory prayers in this ritual prayer's prescribed time. Okay. So you're not forced to pray just the fard. You can pray all your sunnahs. You can pray tahiyyatul masjid. You can pray whatever you want. Okay. With this wudu, it's like you have a normal wudu. Upon expiry of the prescribed time, ablution is nullified. All right, expiry. Why do I emphasize expiry? Because if we don't emphasize expiry and we say when the new time enters, what do we do with Fajr? Because after Fajr there is no Salah time. Is your wudu expired or not? Can you pray, for example, duha with the wudu you had from Fajr? No, you can't. Why? Because your wudu is nullified with the expiry of the prescribed time. So when the sun sets and Fajr is over, then you don't have wudu anymore. Okay. This ruling applies when one performed ablution whilst the cause of the excuse was active, obviously, or it became active in the prescribed prayer's time after completing ablution. If ablution was performed after cessation of the excuse, and it remained so until expiry of the prescribed time, ablution is not nullified upon expiry of the prescribed time as long as another cause of minor ritual impurity did not occur or the cause of the excuse did not become active again. So basically what it's saying is if you stopped bleeding and you got wudu and salah time ended, because you weren't bleeding when you got wudu, that wudu counts as normal wudu, right? If you were bleeding when you got wudu, that would count as your excuse wudu. And because it's an excuse wudu, with the expiry of the time, your wudu would be nullified. But because you weren't even bleeding when you got that wudu, it would just count as normal wudu. Understood? If a quantity in excess of a dirham flows from the cause of the excuse and onto one's garment, okay, so like we said, you're bleeding, right? And it gets onto your clothes. It is permitted not to wash it if the garment would become filthy again before completing the ritual prayer. Okay, so you're bleeding so much that by the time you wash your clothes, it's just going to get dirty again by the time you finish prayer. If the garment will not become filthy before completing the ritual prayer, it is not permissible to omit the washing. Okay, so like when I said that it's pure for you, that is if you're heavily bleeding to the extent where you're unable to wash your clothes and pray before it got dirty again. Okay, but if it's gotten to a stage where you bleed a little bit and then it stops, then obviously you would have to wash your clothes and your body. So 305. This is due to the strength of the outpouring of filth. Yeah. The ritual purity of the legally excused person remains for the entire prescribed time of the ritual prayer if one performed ablution due to the cause of the excuse and another cause of minor ritual impurity did not occur. Okay. So what it's saying is, you have wudu until the salah time ends, as long as something else doesn't happen. So other than your excuse, let's say you were bleeding and then you urinated. Okay, you went to the toilet. Obviously, your salah, your wudu would be invalid, not because you were bleeding, but because you went to the toilet. Okay? If one performed ablution due to another cause of minor ritual impurity and the cause of the excuse had ceased, so you went to the toilet, you stopped bleeding, and then you got wudu. And thereafter, the cause becomes active again, and then you started bleeding, ablution is nullified. Similarly, if ablution was performed for the cause of a legal excuse, then another cause of minor ritual impurity occurred, ablution is nullified. Basically, what we're trying to say is, as long as your excuse carries on, that bleeding will not nullify your wudu. Okay? Anything else will nullify your wudu, and you have to be careful about it. Okay? So we pretend like that bleeding isn't happening. That's your excuse. Okay? But anything else, you have to be careful of it. If obviously the bleeding stops and you no longer have an excuse, then that bleeding would nullify your wudu. It is mandatory to repel the cause of the excuse or limit it to the utmost of one's ability if repelling it completely is not possible, even if this is by means of praying standing or sitting with head gestures, but not by praying lying down. Okay? So for example, let's say you have inconsistent, so urine comes out of you when you're standing up, but if you were to sit down and pray, it wouldn't happen. Then we say you have to sit down and pray. You cannot take this legal excuse. Remember, this is an excuse. This is a fatwa, right? You cannot take this fatwa unless you've tried everything in your power to stop this bleeding or to pray somehow where this doesn't happen to you, okay? For example, with gas, let's say somebody has gas every time they go into ruku and into sajda, the gas comes out. But if they were to pray with head gestures, the gas isn't going to come out. Then we tell them pray with head gestures. Okay? By repelling the excuse with a bandage or filling, or by performing the ritual prayer with head gestures, one does not remain legally excused. Okay, if you're able to somehow stop the bleeding, okay, then, or if you're able to put something wherever the bleeding is coming from, and that's going to stop it from bleeding. And remember, we're talking about legally bleeding, which means even if you were to put cotton into the wound, if it rose up that cotton so much so that it's now out of your body, we still consider that bleeding, even though the cotton is there, right? A plaster is not counted as stopping bleeding. Why? Because the plaster sits on the top of your skin. So if the plaster gets blood on it, that blood has left your body, right? So a plaster or a bandage doesn't stop bleeding. It might stop it from spreading, but it won't stop the bleeding because that goes on top of your skin. So anything on top of your skin, that gets blood on it, we say that it's left your skin. So you would still be bleeding. This is a very important subject. We're going to do this, inshallah, on Thursday. We had a question. Would any one of these prayers have to be repeated? No. That's the whole point of a legal excuse. Okay? As long as your legal excuse carries on, you don't have to do qada of any of these salahs. Obviously, if your legal excuse runs out, then you have to pray it as normal. So you'd have to get your wudu again. You would have to pray it as normal. But none of these salahs would be repeated. You don't have to repeat any of these. Obviously, if you want to go taqwa mode, then you can repeat all of these salahs. Just like somebody who would repeat a salah for missing a sunnah would, right? But legally, you don't have to repeat any of these salahs. Okay, but if you want to do taqwa and you want to be super pious, you can repeat all of these salahs. Just don't repeat them after Asr. Okay. So this is where we'll stop, inshallah. Pay attention, especially to next lesson, inshallah, on Thursday, 5 p.m. The types of filth and purification from them is probably one of the, I'm pretty much said this for almost every subject. Every subject is important, but this is especially important because if you get filth on you, how much do you have to wash it? Most people you ask, right? If we were to do a survey and I were to say, you got blood on your finger or your hand, how many times do you have to wash it? I'm pretty sure most people would say 3 times when that is incorrect. Okay, you don't have to wash everything 3 times. And inshallah on Thursday we'll dive into that subject. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.